Um, Tonight, before I hand things over to this evening's speaker, I want to first take a moment to thank Tin Mountain's Nature Program Series sponsors, and those are Hancock Lumber, White Mountain Oil and Propane, and Farm to Table Market in West Ossipee. So I want to recognize them for their financial support that allow us to put on programming such as this. I also want to thank all of you who are current members of Tin Mountain Conservation Center, because your membership dollars also go towards helping us fulfill our mission and continue our programming. We have a couple, in addition to this evening, we have a couple of interesting upcoming programs. Next Friday, so a week from tomorrow, November 3rd, we are hosting our second annual Adventure Fest. This will be at Ledge Brewing in Intervale, and we have 3 Valley adventurers. We have Anders Morley, Mike Morin, and Micah Bernhardt, who will all be talking about adventures both near and far. Presenting those in little 25-minute presentations. So it will be sort of a nice way to recognize and celebrate some of the far-flung and close to home adventures here, you know, by folks right here in the Mount Washington Valley, and just a little bit different venue. And then the following day on November 4th, we have Deb Ayers, who is a retired elementary school art teacher, is hosting a children's craft program. It is a an owl pastel program. So using some of our maps here creating their own renditions. So kind of a fun program that we have coming up. And then in a little bit further afield, as I think next week the weather will start to feel a little bit more seasonally appropriate. We have our annual Winter Greens and Wreath Making workshop that is scheduled for Saturday, November 18th. So always a fun and popular event. I think it is proof for anyone who has come to it, proof that anyone can make their own wreath. And it's very fun because, probably my favorite part about it is that no 2 wreaths ever look the same. And they all have their own personality, which is part of the fun of it. But today I hesitate to say excited because, talking about
that hurts.
Yeah, more in the I'm really interested, and I think I'm going to, it might depress me, but I think a very important issue, and one that I am very glad that is being tackled locally, looking at microplastic. We are very lucky to have Jill Emerson here from Green Mountain Conservation Group. She is the water quality coordinator, and I am going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. So I apologize in advance. I'm like 15 days or getting over a head cold, so I'm simultaneously sounding like I'm going through puberty and coughing like I've had a bunch of cigarettes before coming in here, so I do apologize for that. But I'm really happy to be speaking here tonight about 2 issues that are global issues, not just happening in the Granite State or in New England, but I do want to talk about how they are influencing New Hampshire, and this is climate change and plastic waste. I will try really, really hard not to make this be doom and gloom hour with Jill Emerson, but unfortunately, a lot of times the solution to any of these problems is massive systemic change. But if you're at least, hopefully it won't be doom and gloom, but you'll at least go away learning something new. So that's good. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Littleton, New Hampshire, which is like 2 hours west of here, more on the Vermont side of the Granite State, but I'm a lifelong Granite Stater. I went to Quinnipiac University in Southern Connecticut and graduated with a molecular biology and microbiology degree and a minor in chemistry. And then immediately following that, I went and worked at Dartmouth in one of their research branches for 10 years. So most of that time was spent working in an organism called Neurospora crassa. Any of you know what that is? I've yet to do one of these talks where anybody knows what that is, and you can go your entire life and never hearing about that organism again. I worked in circadian rhythms, and Neurospora crassa is a type of mold. So I looked at circadian rhythms in a fungal organism. While I was there, I earned my license, molecular biology license from the American Society of Clinical Pathology, which just means I can do genetic testing in a hospital. So if and when I decide I ever would like to make money in my career, I could go and do that. And then in 2018, I joined Green Mountain. I am the head of their research division. It's a branch of one, so I am my own boss in that regards. But we do have AmeriCorps members helping out seasonally. And while my role there is working on tributary and lake monitoring, with education, and you then advocate for those resources in need. And sometimes the end result is land trust. So again, healthy waters, healthy communities. You can see some of our volunteers out here doing some advocacy, one aquifer campaign. So if you've seen those signs around the watershed, that's a campaign we're running to try to promote the fact that water knows no boundaries and we're all affected by things that happen to our water. Now my clicker stopped working. That's fun. There we go. So the Saco River Corridor Commission, again, they're a quasi-state government group. So they are government, but they're also not government. So it's a little bit of a unique situation. They work throughout the entirety of the Saco watershed, working mostly for land use regulatory things and making sure building permits are up to code, but they also do have their own water quality monitoring program as well. They actually join Green Mountain Conservation in that endeavor. So it's two organizations working to protect one watershed. And so I keep using this word watershed. So let's talk about what is a watershed. So you all live in a watershed. Many of you probably live in the Saco River watershed if you're from the local area. And so here is the Saco River watershed. It's split almost 50-50 between New Hampshire and Maine. There's a tiny bit more in New Hampshire. So if I'm doing this presentation in front of a bunch of Mainers, I say we're a tiny bit better than you guys in Maine, which also never works as a good joke. Here is a more close-up view of that watershed. And so it does encompass about 26 towns in some part. The area that Green Mountain focuses on is the Ossipee sub-watershed, which is comprised mostly of 7 towns, but there's 14 towns that have little bits and bobs of their town borders in it. So the research we do at Green Mountain, a couple of these I'm not going to talk about tonight for the sake of time, but we do lake monitoring. We monitor 9+ lakes in the Ossipee watershed, meaning that we do some one and dones on different lake communities, or we help out other lakes who are doing their own monitoring. So we provide them with gear, we help them with any questions that they may have. And so here's some of our AmeriCorps members and volunteers out doing some of that monitoring. Here's that E. coli project, genetic screening that we're doing so we can take and process E. coli samples in-house. And now we're taking a look to see if we can determine where that E. coli originated from. So whether it's from human versus non-human. Still not, oh, it worked. Yes. So the two I'm going to talk about tonight are our tributary monitoring program, which will tie into the climate change we're seeing here in New Hampshire. And then we'll finish up with a short description of what our microplastics program is at Green Mountain. So let's talk about climate change. So this is doom and gloom section 1. Section 2 will be the microplastics, because there wasn't really a great way to marry these two things together. So we'll take a hard right-hand turn when we get there to talk about microplastics. And climate change is one of these topics that we as scientists really struggle to communicate to the general public. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend that I am. But some of the work that I do does reflect what is happening in terms of climate change. One of the things we talk about in at least the research branch with the AmeriCorps members particularly is that we must remember to keep reals before feels, meaning that just because something feels like it's true doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And this seems to be a issue that we've noticed in the past decade or so of really becoming problematic, of people saying, well, that doesn't feel right, so therefore it's not true. So a fact is something that we know is to be true, or we have ample evidence to support how true it is. So usually there is direct evidence or anecdotal evidence, and usually it's not open to a ton of interpretation, whereas a feeling is your emotional state. It's kind of that gut reaction you have. So a lot of times, again, people confuse their feelings for what truth is. A lot of people are now taking that and finding unverified sources. So somebody's great aunt Marge, who's on Facebook, they take her comment as truth, and it kind of gets spread in a giant misinformation campaign. Also, people tend to use the word research without actually knowing what that means. So an example of, well, I've done my own research online, and I always think of the character in The Princess Bride who goes, you keep using that word, I do not think it means what you think it means. So I don't think for this audience, I necessarily need to say this, but in case there's anybody who is not on board with climate change, there really isn't a debate. This is a real thing that is happening. And we need to really stop giving both sides of the situation the same airtime, because frankly, one of them is not based in fact or based in reality. So the fact that we keep presenting them as both sides of the issue is really detrimental for people getting on board with climate change. I've worked in science long enough that I can tell you, if 97% of us agree on anything, literally anything, that must mean we believe how truthful it is, because I've worked with enough scientists to know 97% of us don't agree on anything. And this tends to bring me to my favorite quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson: "It's the good thing about science is it doesn't care whether or not you believe in it, it's true." And I have my little shirt that I sometimes wear when we're at events that says essentially the same thing, so that people can remember that science, there's truth in science. So next time you're at a party and you're looking for some fun facts to share with friends while you're there, or you just want to have the party come to a screeching halt, let's talk about some statistics for climate change. So we're losing 1.2 trillion tons of ice per year. Here's a picture of a glacial formation taken from the 1950s, and here it is a couple of years ago. So we've lost a tremendous amount of ice, and we're losing a tremendous amount of ice every day. All living things on Earth would only be about 1.1 trillion tons. So that helps trying to put it into perspective of how much ice that is. Air pollution is weirdly both hurting and saving us, which is kind of a little bit of an oxymoron. Air pollution kills 9 million people per year, but it's also reflecting some of that sun's heat back out. So yay, I guess, for air pollution. Ocean absorbs a lot of the heat that we produce. It's the equivalent of 2 Hiroshima bombs per second. So in case you're wondering why a coral reef is dying, it's because we're heating up our oceans. The 10 warmest years between 1880 and 2022 have all occurred since 2010. So if you feel like it's warmer, it is. And it would be a lot cheaper for us in the long run to actually invest in green infrastructure. Not only would it create up to 20 million jobs, but it really would only cost us 3% of the global GPT in the next 20 years, which is a lot of money. We're talking about trillions, so I'm not pretending it's not a lot of money, but in the big scheme of things, we spend more time mitigating the effects of climate change instead of trying to halt it where it is. So here are some pictures of climate change in New England. So as I mentioned, it's getting warmer. So you can see starting in 1901, where data were first collected, we have heated up tremendously, not only in New England, but countrywide. And this is a global phenomenon that we're seeing. In New England, we may not have had necessarily more hot days, but what we're seeing is that we're having a lot more warm nights. So data that was started to be collected in 1950 through 2014, you could see more and more nights are exceeding temperatures from the year before. So we're having a lot more warm evenings, which is good and bad. Great for if you're out doing marshmallows, bad for the environment. If we continue to do nothing, which unfortunately seems to be humanity's trajectory, we are going to expect up to 15 degrees of temperature change by the time we hit the next century. If we are able to mitigate some of it, we'll come in a little bit lower, but if you can see where the red and the green combine here, we're on target to hit those higher emissions and hit them soon. One of the things that has been really obvious, is particularly this past year, is the amount of precipitation we've had. So I'm sure all of you were somehow affected by the flooding over the summer, and maybe more than once. And so if you think New England is getting wetter, it is. The country is going to have a very interesting divide where half of them are going to be in drought-like conditions and the other half are going to be in flooding conditions. We're not necessarily going to have more days of rain, but when we have rain, the events will be much greater. So when we do have rain, instead of that 1/4 inch of rain or that nice misting rain, we're going to have pounding rain. Warm air holds more liquid. And so as we're warming up, we're going to see that more liquid come over and just drench us. And if you didn't get to see the Madison washouts this year, this is the July one. It also washed out in May, but not nearly as dramatically. So here are some pictures from WMUR and some local friends in the area who were able to go out and grab their cameras. This photo, I think, is particularly telling. There's a gentleman who lives down the embankment of 113 and had basically all of the fill from the road wash right into his house. And this is his truck out here, and he's got one of those big like F-250, 350 things. So it's a really big truck, and you can see how high up the sedimentation is in his driveway. In case I haven't convinced you about the fact that we're getting more rain, data that had been collected from NOAA starting in 1895 show that the timeline between June and August of this year was the highest rain that we've ever had in New Hampshire. And if you look at it starting from about 2005 and on, we've had many record-breaking or near record-breaking seasons of rain. So this has been a tremendous amount of rain, and we'll probably break that record again pretty quickly, because that's essentially what we do every couple of years, is we make a record and then we break it a few years later. So at this point, I want to tie in one of the programs that we run at Green Mountain and the Saco River Corridor Commission, which is our tributary monitoring program. So we've dubbed it RIVERS, which is a giant acronym that none of you ever need to learn. But basically, it's a joint partnership between the two organizations to do water quality monitoring. We monitor things biweekly from May through September or October. Different organizations have different timelines. Green Mountain does continue to do some monitoring in the winter, but we have 10 sites that we've selected that we feel like will give us the most information. And so we follow those during the winter as well. And actually, Grace, one of our AmeriCorps members back there, one of her first experiences was sticking her hands in very cold water and collecting water quality samples. So this started in 2000. GMCG has a close partnership with UNH and the UNH Cooperative Extension. And at the time, we were doing natural resource inventory planning with all of the towns. And from that, somebody made a comment of like, hey, we should be doing some surface water quality monitoring. Meanwhile, in Maine, they were having very similar conversations of, hey, we're a watershed protection agency, but we're not monitoring our waters. Let's fix that. And at the time, the two executive directors of both organizations were pretty good friends. So they decided, let's divide and conquer instead of working in parallel with each other. So this is a picture of our first two volunteers out with a bunch of equipment, basically just figuring it out. So we really relied heavily on volunteer help at that point in time. These two guys were amazing in just literally going out in the field, trying to figure out how do the meters work, how are the data collected, and really launched us into the program that we've had today that's been running for 21 consecutive seasons. So basically, water quality monitoring, it's really just looking at the chemical, physical, and biological characteristics of the water. We look at certain parameters and we compare them to standards that are set by the EPA or standards of what we expect to find in pristine waters. So New Hampshire and Maine both have, for some of their rivers, designations of how pristine they need to be. Maine has all the way up to class AA, and then A, B, C, and D, where New Hampshire has A, B, C, and D as their designations, with A being of the utmost purity. We've gathered these data for the last 21 years. So not only can we see the changes at sites, we can see the changes in between sites, and we can see how it's changed over time. A lot of times we are looking at human intervention, but we're also interested in how different natural things impact our water quality. And our research objectives are really quite simple. how clean is the water? That's a question we get all the time at the organization. And we can say, you know, in our area, our water is pretty clean, and then we can talk about specific issues. We want to see how the quality is changing over time. We want to see how does land use affect these things. And we want to have something that we can give future generations, a baseline of data, so that people 20, 30, 40 years from now can go back and see the work that we have done. And hopefully it can give them some clues to help whatever their water quality issues are in the future. So this is almost purely run by entirely volunteers in the area. We have a very passionate group of volunteers that are about 30 or 35 strong who go out every season and they monitor. They essentially adopt a site or two that they take care of for the entire season, that they visit every other week during the summer. They're all trained in April. Even ones that have been with our program for 21 years get retraining every year. They all follow a QAP protocol, which is a quality assurance project plan that's been approved by DES, Maine DEP, and the EPA. So every 5 years, we all get together as a big group and we talk about the data that we collected. What techniques are we using? How has technology changed? We make some minor adjustments to our protocols and then we reteach the volunteers. We do have AmeriCorps members who help heavily in this project. So once the volunteers are trained, we essentially let them loose, but we do check up on them a few times a year. And we're always available to answer questions as needed. So while they're out there, our volunteers are trained in how to use a Hawk multimeter. There's a couple of different flavors of meters out there. We use the Hawk ones. And while they're out there, they're collecting a couple of different parameters that I'm going to go over more in a minute. They're also out there grabbing water samples for us that we package up and send to UNH for some laboratory analysis that we can't currently do in-house, although I'm hopeful one day we will get that instrumentation to do that. And finally, some of them are collecting biological samples. E. coli and Enterococcus we can process in-house. So at some locations, they are collecting some water samples for us to do that processing. Excuse me. So let's talk about those field parameters I mentioned. So as I said, every volunteer has a site or two, some cases 3, some of them really like our program, that they go out and they adopt every year. So they're from May through October. So they can tell me minute changes that are happening at their site, and especially the ones that have been there year after year after year. So they're checking for what's the stream appearance? Is there logging happening near my site? Is there road construction, a new house going in? Whatever it is, a moose has trampled through their sampling site at some point. So they're taking those site observations so that it will tell us something if we're noticing some changes in the water quality. They're looking at temperature. There's no set standard for temperature, but we obviously want to know how warm or cold the water is because there's a lot of different organisms that depend on certain temperatures in order to thrive. They take turbidity readings, which is going to be really important in a minute because we're going to talk about a lot of that turbidity data and how it plays a role in climate change. But turbidity is basically how clear is your liquid. So the higher your value, the more muddy your water is. The lower the value, the more clean your water is in terms of particulate matter. Most of the water in our area is between like 1 and 2 NTUs, so it's pretty particulate free. They take pH samples. We used to let them go out in the field with the pH meter, but it's expensive when they break those, and they would break that meter very often, so we stopped giving it to them. And they just collect water samples for us now to pH back in-house. Our water in this area is slightly acidic. We don't have a lot of limestone, and we do have a lot of oak and hemlock and pine that can affect that. But basically any natural or any organism wants to kind of be hanging around neutral pH. And so we do have pretty close to neutral pH here. Specific conductance is a proxy for road salt. I could give an entire 1-hour speech about road salting in New England, but for the sake of time, I will spare you all of that. But we know that we have a Salt Responsibly site online on our website that you can go and learn all about salting in New England. And finally, our volunteers are looking at dissolved oxygen. When we do this program with the kids, usually they're surprised that fish breathe. That's one of their favorite factoids usually of the day because they're not really considering that there's oxygen in water. So everything needs oxygen to breathe. And there are some organisms that depend on higher levels of oxygen, like the trout and the salmon, versus things like pike and walleye don't need as much oxygen in their waters. So again, here's that watershed again. This is the entire Saco River watershed. All of the yellow spots are where the SRCC monitor, and orange is where Green Mountain does. This is slightly out of date because both organizations have picked up a few more sites. But what this is really showing is that we're in throughout the entirety of the watershed, from the headwaters to where it goes out in the ocean in the Saco Biddeford area. So one of the things that our data are picking up is that we're able to see when storm events happen. Obviously, there's lots of rain gauge data out there that we could simply look up when we're seeing a storm. But one of the things where we see the greatest reflection of a storm is in that turbidity levels or the amount of sedimentation in your water. So here is a graph from the Bear Camp River in Ospey. We're near the Whittier Bridge, if you guys know where that is, or the Bear Camp Garden Center. We're monitoring right over there. And this is one of the sites that we do all year round. So we have lots of data for the site, not just this year, but in previous years. And the first thing that you notice is, hey, there's moments where you've got real big increases in turbidity. And I'm able to correlate that with storms. So sometimes the peaks may not be as high as you would expect because there are sometimes, frankly, it just wasn't safe for us to go out and monitor. We take our volunteer safety in tremendous consideration, and we never put our volunteers in a situation where we feel it's dangerous. So in the first flood in May, nobody went out and sampled for the first couple of days because of how horrific the water levels were. But even still 4 days after at Bear Camp, I'm able to pick up a 4-fold increase in the amount of turbidity. So there's 4 times more sedimentation in the water during that storm. We had another one at the end of June that was about 1.5 inches of rain. And again, an increase in sedimentation. Here's the one that washed out 113 in Madison. At this site, it was about 1.5 inches of rain. Again, an increase in turbidity. 2 inches of rain in another storm at mid-August. Over 2 inches of rain, another 6-fold increase in turbidity. And we had one final storm for these data in end of September. And again, we see that increase in turbidity. So every time it storms, the Bear Camp River is accepting anywhere between 4 and 6-fold more sedimentation. So this rain data might be slightly off from where you personally live. So you may have had more or less rain during those storms. This was taken from the South Tamworth USGS station, which is upstream of where we monitor. We don't have a monitoring site right at their station, which would be ideal, but it's not the most convenient thing to get to. But basically, our data reflect that, yes, when we have storms, we are seeing when those storms are. And so the problem here is that we're having a lot of runoff going into our rivers, which ultimately then dump into our lakes. And so runoff is basically what it sounds like. It's water just running off into an area, usually the lowest point on the land, before dumping itself into a river or a lake. The issue with runoff is that it's picking up a lot of material on its way to get to where it's going. And so it's picking up fertilizers, oils, pesticides, salts. It's also picking up dirt, sediment, sand, any type of particulates that are on the ground, running unimpeded directly into our waterways. This can cause erosion, which then can help destabilize banks. So sometimes with houses that are right on the sides of rivers, when there's a lot of erosion, you see them collapsing right into the water. With all of that sedimentation that water is picking up, we are increasing the phosphorus and nitrogen levels of our freshwater. That's problematic because cyanobacteria, which is known as blue-green algae, despite not always being blue-green or an algae, depend on that phosphorus to grow. So they need nitrogen, phosphorus, and heat. Not a lot we can do about the heat. They will fixate nitrogen from the atmosphere if needed. If it's available, they'll sure as heck use it. But phosphorus is the one thing that they can't get unless we provide it for them. It will affect fish populations. Obviously, some of them may be smothered. They may lose their food sources, which then will affect the hierarchy of food webs, essentially. So the higher level organisms won't be able to eat the lesser level organisms. And too much erosion can cause aquifer recharge areas to be affected. So when it rains, the rain essentially is entering into the ground. Here, I got an example. I don't need to describe it. Here's a picture. When it rains, we have lots of places in the natural water cycle to have that infiltration happen for the water to go into the ground, and it can recharge our aquifers to provide more drinking water or more water for use underground. Plants help to evaporate off some of that water back into the atmosphere. A little bit of it would run off onto your stream, but by and large, the rain has someplace to go. It is going into vegetation. It's going into the ground. What we have done in our urbanization is we've provided a lot of impervious surfaces, places where rain cannot penetrate, the tops of roofs, the tops of cars, parking lots, roadways, all of these things, water can't go into the ground. So it's going to run right off the top of it and go to its lowest point, which is typically a brook, a stream, a lake, a river. And so some of you may have this on your property where you have suddenly a lot of rain and then you get these little streams that look like the muddy Mississippi flowing through, and that's taking all that sedimentation with it. So let's look now at how two rivers behave during a storm event. So we're going to talk specifically about Danforth Bay. So this picture is here to help orient you if you're not familiar with the Ossipee Lake area. So this is 25 and here's 16. So their connector would be here-ish. This is the big lake. We're going to be looking at two rivers up here. So here's a little bit of a close-up. The two brooks we're going to be talking about are Shawtown Brook, which is here, and the upper Danforth outflow. So it's really hard to see these on this map. I apologize, but here's the first one and here's the second one. So Shawtown Brook, its source is Trout Pond in the Freedomtown Forest, if any of you know where that is. And it meanders through a high beaver location before going through a campground and then dumping directly into this middle Danforth area. Conversely, Upper Danforth comes down originally from Purity Springs in Madison, goes past a horse farm, a burnt meadow horse, I think. I'm not quite sure if that's a name, before going into Upper Danforth. Some people know Upper Danforth as Huckins. So if you know Huckins Lake, that's where that is. But basically both of these streams or rivers are in pretty protected and pretty vegetative areas. There is some development though that you see here in the red, that this is where Danforth Campground is, and then the Bluffs is the other red location. And so during a storm, we have followed these two locations during storms for the past 2 years just to see what happens in a single example of a river in a storm versus a river not in a storm. So this was last September when I took this photo. And so Shawtown Brook looks like this during a storm event. Whereas on a typical day, Shawtown Brook has pretty low turbidity or pretty low sedimentation in its water. So here you can see for the past 2 years, I promise there's a little tiny bar graph there that you cannot possibly see, but its amount of turbidity is around 1. During a storm event, what we see is a 9-fold increase this year, and last year, a 95-fold increase in the amount of sedimentation. The other river also does see an increase in sedimentation. It did in 2023, not too badly in 2022, but there's still a jump in the amount of particulates in the water. We don't have the results for the phosphorus for 2023 yet, but we do have them for 2022. So you can really clearly see here during the normal working hours, if you will, of Shawtown Brook, it has a low level of phosphorus that's in it in its normal day-to-day, but during a storm event, it increases almost 10-fold. And so every time we're having a storm event, something like that is happening, where we're just throwing sediment into these rivers that then goes right into our water. And Danforth has had cyanobacteria issues. Fortunately, the past couple of years, they've been lucky and they haven't had any. But in previous years, it was a pretty routine thing for them to get to August and then start having cyanobacteria blooms. So here's a picture of one of their blooms. Cyanobacteria doesn't always present itself this way, but it's typically blue-green, and it could look like paint in the water, or sometimes it's referred to as like green silly string in the water. This is Dolichospermum, which is a kind of generic run-of-the-mill cyanobacteria we have here in New England. Danforth does benefit from the fact that it does have something called a watershed management plan, which is something that we encourage all lake communities to have. This will go around and monitor. People will go out and look around at your lake, look for places of runoff, look for places where they see issues, and they will highlight them and then basically tell you how to fix them and how much they think it'll cost to fix them. Danforth, one of their issues is that 88% of their phosphorus is coming from external sources, meaning it's coming from the outside and going in through those runoff areas. And almost every property owner can go around and tell you exactly where the water goes during a rain event. And a lot of times for the property owners there, it's going directly into the water, not going into that vegetative habitat, and it's dragging all the phosphorus and sediment with it. One of the things we talk to lake communities a lot about, and I've had this conversation many times, and sometimes lake communities need to hear it more than once, is that you need to be proactive and not reactive. So it's not a trivial amount of money to install something called the best management practice, which is correcting for those areas where you have runoff. But typically it's in the thousands of dollars, maybe in the millions if you have a large lake with a lot of houses on it that need a lot of best management practices installed. If you choose to then wait until you have issues, and now we're talking about restoration of your lake, that's typically in the high thousands to millions of dollars. So this is one of these cases where being proactive is going to save you in the long run. The last option some lakes unfortunately do choose is to neglect. And then that's when you're in the millions and potentially billions of dollars. Once you start taking into consideration, property values will decrease. Any recreational businesses that depend on that lake health will probably die off. So campgrounds, kids' summer camps, boating institutions, fishing organizations. And then once you're taking into consideration too, the health impact of being exposed again and again and again to toxins, we're now in the billions of dollars. It's not world ending if you live on a lake or you have a river and you don't have a watershed management plan. There are lots of groups out there to help you do DIY. So if you also like doing things on your own, there's an organization called Soak Up the Rain. There's a New Hampshire division. It's part of the EPA, but there's one in every state that will give you step-by-step instructions on how to do these things. You can get somebody to come out and help you evaluate your property, but it's pretty easy to do. I mean, I helped install some of these BMPs. So honestly, like if I can do it, really anybody can do it because I'm not really all that great with tools and things. But here is the campground on Danforth putting in infiltration stairs. And that was a bit of money for them to put in, but what it saved them is not only it stopped eroding away their beach, they found that the stairs were safer for their guests. They didn't need to hire crews to come out and rake it and bring fill in every time it washed away. It's aesthetically pleasing. It looks way better than the pathway that they previously had there, which I'm bummed we didn't have a photo of that. But it was basically like this cliff that people had to go down to get to the boats. And it's pretty easy to maintain. So they're very happy with the stairs. So it was a win for the environment and a win for the campground. Danforth now has a 319 grant that is going to help them continue to install those best management practices to try to help restore the issues that their lake has. Oh, sorry. That's a picture of a rain garden, which is just a different type of BMP. So BMPs, best management practices, come in all different shapes and flavors. So you might have a choice of different things that you can do, but something as simple as a rain barrel can be a best management practice of just having something that catches the water coming off the roof of your house. So this is sort of an ideal waterfront home. If your home doesn't have a healthy riparian or a vegetative habitat, you can, again, use those best management practices to help. Excuse me, a single home can have a lot of different BMPs to them. So here it would be like sort of the model home of they use minimal chemicals and fertilizers near the waterway. They maintain their septic systems. They have a small amount of lawn. We do get some reports of some lake owners throw their grass clippings into the lake. So we usually encourage them to stop doing that because that is feeding phosphorus to the cyanobacteria. Pick up any animal waste and just prevent erosion by having native plants be right there on your shoreline to catch the water before it's going into the lake. So again, rain gardens, swales, vegetative buffers, and culverts are some simple things, maybe not culverts, but are some simple things that people can install. Depending on who you are, culverts might be easy, not for me. But speaking of culverts, it kind of segues into what could we be doing as a watershed? So even those of us who do not live directly on water, how can we start to prepare for the future now? So again, unless we are going to have a great awakening in humanity and get our acts together on climate change, the next best thing we can do is prepare for the future by changing and fixing our culverts. So all of those once in a lifetime storm events that we had multiple just this summer, that's going to continue to happen. They're not going to be once in a lifetime anymore. And so one of the things that Green Mountain, in conjunction with Fish and Game and the North Country Council, and some other players throughout decided to do is let's look at our culverts. Nobody could tell us the last time anybody went out and looked at culverts and evaluated them. So we said, hey, we'll do it. I stood in a lot of culverts from 2020 to 2022. So our watershed again is about 869-ish square miles. So we have about 1,300 miles of road, 71 miles of rail. Believe it or not, there's lots of railways that have lots of culverts out in the middle of the woods that we hiked into and we evaluated. Lots of snow machine trails, and we were able to predict that we would find about 1,200 culverts, give or take, while we were out there. So obviously stream crossings are critically important to us. We need roads to drive, to get to work, to get to the grocery store, to have emergency services be able to get through. We depend on tourism here, and we need the tourists to be able to drive all up and clog North Conway during the summer. And right now, a lot of them are very old and they're in various states of decline, and they have a high risk of failure. which will impact not only our roads, but again, our water quality, because all of that runoff now is going to go directly into our lakes and rivers. It's going to affect our aquatic species, and our floodplains will not operate in the way that they are meant to. So this is one of these cases that when we improve the ecosystems and improve this, and it'll improve the safety, and those things are positively correlated to each other. So what do I mean by stream crossings and culverts? So culverts maybe is not, stream crossings would have been a better thing for me to say, because bridges count as a stream crossing. And these are the different types of stream crossings you can have. And I personally have stood in almost all of these. The only one I didn't get to was a ford, which I would have really liked to have evaluated that, but I didn't get there. But bridges, open bottom arches, so ones that look a little droopy, elliptical culverts, so ones that are like a squish circle, pipe arch culverts, box culverts, and then this was always my favorite one of a God only knows culvert, because you'd get out there and you couldn't tell what it was supposed to be because it was in such a state of disrepair. And historically, when we've installed these culverts, we haven't really given a lot of consideration to what type of materials we used or whether or not we were keeping the stream in equilibrium, and we weren't really considering how well our aquatic organism friends could pass through there. So here's an issue, or what I mean by stream equilibrium and why that's important. So basically, it's making sure that when the water comes in and it goes out, it's basically going through as if the structure were not even there. And here's a case where that didn't happen, and we put in a culvert that wasn't the size that it needed to be. So as the water flows in, what happens is essentially it gets clogged in front of the culvert, and it can't all go through at the same time. So it's losing its energy as it's sort of waiting its turn, if you will. It's essentially in a queue, and any sediment it's brought with it, it's now dropped. And so a lot of these culverts will have a bunch of rocks and sand almost in front of it, or maybe a couple of feet in front of it. When it finally gets to have its turn to go through, it comes out the other side as if it were like a fire hose. So suddenly it's bursting out the other end. And as it's doing that, it's going to scour or grab sediment and erode near where the culvert is. So when we have all of that soil in front, it's called aggradation. So this is a culvert going in, and you can see here in front of it, it's picked up a lot of rocks and stones over the years. Excuse me. And on its other reverse side, here's where the stream bed used to be. And you can see there's probably a good 8 inches to a foot there of where the stream bank used to be. But as it did that fire hose-like effect, it grabbed all that material and ran with it downstream. Conversely, a lot of streams that stay in equilibrium typically are bridges. Doesn't have to be. There's lots of other culverts that can do this too, but bridges are one of those things where the water comes in on one side, it goes out the other way, and it wouldn't even know that a bridge was there, or it would very minimally know that there was a bridge. So in addition to stream equilibrium, again, our aquatic friends need some help. And this is why part of the reason why we see so many turtles on the road during the spring and the fall. Half of the fish species in greatest conservation need use these corridors that are riddled with culverts to get to spawning areas. And based on the way that we've installed these, they really can't. So a lot of people are aware that like New England has a dam issue, not a dam issue, but a dam issue, where we have so many dams that are not really doing much of anything, because that was a thing that we did back in the day, was make dams everywhere. Same thing with culverts. There's at least 3 different species that we have found in New Hampshire, but really any of these are predicted to be found in our watershed that really depend on that migratory behavior to go to their spawning sites and produce more. The American eel, the rainbow smelt, and the brook trout are 3 such organisms. So we decided to get involved with SAIDS and the Stream Crossing Initiative out of DES. So as of 2023, there's 14,000 culverts of the predicted 21 plus in the entire state that have been analyzed. So we are making progress, but we still have a ways to go. As I mentioned before, we participated in this from 2020 to 2022, and our organization did 500 culverts in the Ospey watershed by ourselves. North Country Council was in charge of doing a lot of the things in the northern part of the Saco watershed, and then Fish and Game kind of floated in between and helped at any place that they could. So they were really responsible for doing a lot of the trail crossings in national forests, for example. You may have seen us out there. We had some goofy posts, and we're typically in bright yellow, and it looked like I'm sure it looked very bizarre for people driving by with what we were doing out there. So here's just a quick smattering of photos that we collected as we're having fun out in the field, standing in poison ivy, getting chewed by mosquitoes, and measuring culverts that sometimes were very hard to evaluate. Each culvert had up to 93 points of data collected for it. 2 questions were related to beavers, which I personally felt like could have been 1 question. But it was 93 points of data per every culvert. So we looked upstream, we looked at the culvert itself, both where the water went in and where it came out. And then we took some measurements of what's happening downstream as well. And so now the phase of this program is we're talking to the towns about the results of what we found. And so we're trying to get planning boards and different organizations just involved in, hey, we have these culvert data. You may want to know about this so that it helps you in the town prioritize what to replace. So here are just some quick facts about what we found. So out of the, I think it was almost 1,200 culverts that were predicted, we found almost 1,100 of them. Some of them we were walking around out on ATV trails, not knowing where this culvert actually existed, if it ever really existed. So I'm sure we missed some. Some of them were on private land that we did not get permission from the landowners to go on. And some of them we just went to and it wasn't safe for our volunteers or for us to be out there monitoring. Some of them are on some real steep embankments that just the footing wasn't conducive for evaluation. So here's a quick little pie chart about the different types we have. We're basically a big fan of bridges and round culverts, which are the 2 most types of stream crossings that we have, but there's a smattering of a few other things in here as well. So how'd we do for culverts? We did okay, is kind of the best that I can say about it. We had about a quarter of them that were great for geomorphotic compatibility, so making sure that that stream kind of can go through unimpeded. About half of them were mostly compatible. They might have had a few issues. They might have been starting to break or showing signs of wear and tear, or maybe they had a little bit of aggradation in front of them or scour on the other side. But we still have quite a few of culverts that didn't quite pass the muster, if you will. And one of the things that was noted most about our culverts is they're undersized. So the average structure width of a culvert was only 63% of the channel bankful width, or where that river goes, essentially. And to accommodate for flooding events, you really want to have it be 120% of how wide that river is. So if your culvert is, or if your river is 10 feet wide, you want your culvert to be 12 feet wide. In terms of aquatic passage, we did okay here as well. So a little less than half of our culverts were in compliance with allowing organisms to move through it freely. But then again, that means about half of them organisms really couldn't move through quite as freely. Sometimes the perched culverts, so the ones that were not directly into the stream bed, but up above, might be okay for older trout to jump through, but younger trout were not going to be able to hurdle that high. But more importantly, how will they do during a flood? So this is really where we can start to see some important facts. So here's just an example of what was considered passing. If the water could go through without being on top of the culvert or overtopping it, it passed. Vulnerable meant we think it will still survive a flood, but it may not do real well. And overtopping is obviously now it's going over the top of the culvert and you're most likely to have road washout. So in a 2-year storm event, 80% of our culverts about to do a good job. They hold up. But the problem is now as we're entering into this new phase of climate, when we're having these once in a lifetime events happening more than once in a lifetime, a lot of our culverts are going to fail. About 70% of them will not survive a 100-year flood, which again are those storms that we are seeing more and more of. So through that evaluation, we estimate that there's about, give or take, 450 culverts of the 1,100 we monitored that are of the highest risk and the ones that we would recommend having replaced first. This may change slightly as we're still collecting some information. Typically, there's some of the culverts have soil measurements that were taken that are still being processed, so it might change, but roughly we're looking at 450 culverts. And it's not going to be cheap to do this. It's going to be about $130 million for us to fix those culverts with a little extra spending room to pick up a couple of extra culverts that we're sure will come out as we're continuing to do this analysis. If you're wondering how the culverts did in your area of the watershed, there is a map. These data are available to everyone. I highly suggest you don't try to navigate it alone unless you're really good with GIS maps, because there's a lot of layers to these, but there's a lot of people out there who can help. So you can either contact us. If you can get somebody at DOT, that's great. But New Hampshire DES has a lot of staff available that can help you pull up the data that you need for your specific town. So why do this? That's a lot of money. This is one of those cases where you get a good return on investment. So it's about a 7-fold return on investment for doing this. When you think of the time, the amount of money to not only to fix the culvert, fix the roadways, but having emergency personnel having to go around, people who can't get into their jobs, and traffic being rerouted onto roads that are not able to handle that amount of traffic, it's a 7-fold return on investment. And one could also argue that it's good for the human ecosystem. It keeps us on the road. It's good for the natural environment because water can pass through unimpeded. Our aquatic friends can travel through it. And we frankly just need to have a more resilient watershed. And if we're able to do this project, we could be the example for other places in New Hampshire or New England about how to do these types of surveys. So we, along with our friends at Fish and Game and North Country Council and a couple of other players, wrote a FEMA grant for this that would help fund a plan for financing for that $130 million. Unfortunately, our first round of this, we were denied. One of the things that they highlighted, there was a few technical issues that we have since corrected, but one of the things that they really hammered home on is that we did not have enough letters of support. So if you were part of a planning board, a conservation commission, a select board, or you've got friends, please have them support this project because it could really be beneficial for our entire watershed. You can write to me, you can write to Tara Schroeder, who's in charge of the project. But again, there's a lot of people who have hands in this, people at Fish and Game, people at DES, North Country Council. So if you've got friends on there, if you want to know how to write the letter of support, we're happy to help. So please just reach out to us. We're resubmitting in January, so we're going to give it the old college try once more, and with any luck, we will be granted funding next August. But from there, what we'll do is we'll complete a financial strategy. We'll do outreach and education for all of the towns, and hopefully we can get the towns to vote and agree upon our plan of action so that we can start getting ourselves prepared for the climate change that's happening now. A lot of people helped with this. It would be unfair to not acknowledge them. So Ben Nugent and Brian gave me a lot of their slide deck to use for this presentation. Lots of volunteers went out and gave us their time. Lots of town officials have talked to us about these projects, and we have lots of funding and partner organizations that are all listed there. So screeching hard to the right about a different global problem is plastics. I couldn't quite figure out how to marry these two things together. So I just went, we'll just treat them as if they're separate things. So this is gloom and doom part 2. You're almost done, I promise. This project was supported by the New Hampshire State Conservation Commission. You might know it as the moose plate people. So if you have one of those moose plate license plates on the back of your card, thank you. You supported my work. And I would urge you to continue to support this program. My project is done with this, but there's lots of great projects happening all throughout New Hampshire that you are supporting. So if you did support it in the last couple of years, you paid directly for this work. So let's talk about plastic. How did we get to having such a global problem with our plastics? So this graph is a little outdated because it's only up to 2017, but I'm sure we are still producing the same amount of plastic, probably more to be quite honest. Up to 400 million tons per year of plastic is produced. And I'm sure it will not be surprising to you that the United States is the worst offender of plastic production. By 2050, we will have more plastic per pound in the ocean than we will fish. I will see this. I will be firmly in my 50s, and my kids will see this. And that's a pretty terrifying statistic when you think of it. This is assuming we don't change anything, which again, humanity has not done a real bang up job of changing. So I think that unfortunately this will happen. This guy in the middle, there's a person in here. I don't know if you can see him. That's his face. There's a shoe. That's Jeb Barrier. He has a documentary called Bag It. I highly recommend it. But he's wearing 500 single-use plastic item bags because that is the average of what a single individual uses in a single year. So he likes to wear it as his costume. Good for Halloween, I suppose. But it really helps hammer home how many 500 single-use plastic bags really is. So how did we get to having this problem? Plastic simply means anything that's pliable, and there's been many civilizations throughout time that have used plastics in different ways. A lot of it has been gum from trees that then they can use to make tools, or in this case, this is like probably an ancient piece of sporting equipment, but weatherizing buildings. So plastics in and of itself is not new, but the plastics we know of today really started in the late 1800s. So a firm in New York that depended highly on ivory needed to come up with a way that they didn't have to use ivory. We had done a really bang up job at that point of killing off the elephants and the rhinos, and they're not exactly the easiest source of renewable materials. So what else could we do? So, excuse me. went through puberty there. So a gentleman won a $10,000 reward for creating the first synthetic polymer. But plastics as we know it today, which means entirely something synthetic, was really created in the early 1900s and was known as Bakelite. So Bakelite's claim to fame is at this time of the turn of the century, a lot of houses were being either retrofitted or created to have electricity in them. And we needed something to insulate the wires so these new houses didn't just crumble and burn to the ground. So Bakelite is what we used. Right after the beginning of the 1900s, we had a couple of wars. Those were pretty bad. And if necessity is the mother of invention, father is her warfare, because every time we seemingly have a war, we get really creative with the things that we make. So in World War II, it was plastic. There was a lot of rationing going on for different materials. And eventually it was determined that, hey, if we use plastic instead of these natural materials, we can do it for cheaper and we can do it for faster. We don't have to wait for trees to grow up and to do timber harvest. We don't have to ore or mine for ore. We can just create the thing that we need. And so by the end of the war, we had started incorporating plastics into our everyday lives. It was used in grenades, radar cables, uniforms, tank parts, nylon roping, you name it, there was probably a plastic component or two in it. Post World War II, we never went back to the before times of using more natural resources, which has basically brought us to today's problem of we have a lot of plastic. And when you think of plastic pollution, when we talk to kids about this, a lot of them, if they've even heard of it, they think of something oceanic, which is perfectly understandable. So here's the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Anywhere where there's a gyre in the ocean, there's a plastic garbage patch out there. Or perhaps you think of a third world country where all of the litter is right up on the shoreline. Or the one that's most common is something with a turtle. It's a turtle in a net. It's a turtle with a straw out of its nose. It's a turtle that's wrapped in a plastic bag, but it's something with a turtle. And unfortunately, plastics have infiltrated not only our daily lives, but they are literally everywhere. There is no place you can go on Earth and not find some type of plastic. So there's the Mariana Trench. And here you can see footage of a single-use plastic bag rolling along at the bottom. Mount Everest, of course, has had a terrible history of having single-use plastic items, to the point where in 2020, Nepal banned expeditions from having single-use plastic going up and down the mountain. In Antarctica recently, a survey done had 5 times more plastic in that ocean than they had predicted. And even in the Arctic Circle, when you take ice and snow samples, you can find plastic in them. And if you're thinking, but wait, I recycle. I dutifully take my recycling to the transfer station every Saturday, and I sort and I organize and I give it, and it's going off and being reused. I hate to tell you, it's not. So about 8% of what you throw into a recycling bin is actually recycled, and it typically is only 1, 2, and 5. The other types of plastic are not able to be recycled, and even all of plastic that is 1, 2, or 5 is not recycled. And if you go, well, okay, nothing on Earth doesn't have plastic, but I don't. Well, I hate to break that to you too. If you eat, drink, or breathe, you have plastic in you. And so this is my favorite part of this talk, where we play a really gross game of how much plastic do you think that you consume in a week. I'm not going to make you raise your hands. I want you just to read the different categories. Basically, you can choose none, which I wouldn't, or the weight of a paperclip, a penny, or a credit card. You can also choose not to play this game. That's always a viable option. And a lot of times I do get, I'm not playing. So if you picked D, congratulations, you are correct. You're eating about a credit card's worth of plastic per week. This, of course, changes depending on your lifestyle. So if you eat a lot of seafood and shellfish, you probably have more. And if you have a lot of things that come in plastic wrap or a plastic bottle, like your orange juices or whatever, you might have a little bit more than that. If you're more of a farm-to-table lifestyle and you drink your tap water, it might be slightly less. But on average, a person eats about a credit card a week. And if you're wondering how much that is in a year, it's 260 grams, which is the weight of 1 indoor volleyball or 2 largish bananas, 3 full decks of cards, 4 tennis balls, or 8 pairs of socks. So whatever analogy works for you, that's what you consume in a year for plastic. So how are we consuming that? I'm assuming you're not all just eating credit cards. I mean, you might be, I don't know you, but I'm assuming you're not eating credit cards. So a lot of this contamination in our bodies is coming from something called microplastics, which is exactly what it sounds like, small pieces of plastic. The term was coined in 2004 by a British scientist who was doing a different type of ocean survey and finding all of this plastic in his samples. It's frequently defined as being 5 millimeters or less in length. That's about 1/5 of an inch. So it's right at the cusp for what we can see with the naked eye. So a lot of the work that we do is doing it with microscopy, but some of the bigger pieces we can actually see. And then there's subcategories beyond that of nanoplastics and so on that just get smaller and smaller and smaller. Usually, but not always, it's from a bigger plastic thing that's now a smaller plastic thing. Microbeads being the one real exception to that. So microbeads were a really popular thing to have in the 90s. I definitely remember my face wash being covered in these beads that I'd spread all over my face. In 2015, the Obama administration banned microbeads, which is great, but that didn't stop corporations from putting plastic into things. They just did it via not beads. Plus, we import so many products from different countries that don't have that rule. It was good, but it honestly didn't really matter all that much. Microfibers come from clothing. I'm wearing multiple pieces tonight that have plastic in them. This thing does, my shoes do, my leggings do, and you're probably wearing some plastic items as well. So as I'm walking around, I am sloughing off little pieces of plastic, and every time I do my wash and my dry, I'm sloughing off more plastic that just goes into the environment. And finally, microfragments are kind of the catch-all of it. With something bigger, now it's something smaller. It's a weird shape, maybe a weird color. Don't really know what it was. So those are broadly the big three categories of microplastics. And what's great is we do have a lot of information on what microplastics are doing in the ocean, but we don't have as much in fresh water. So this is not at all an exhaustive collection of data, but Adventure Scientists is a group that just tries to compile data into one place so that scientists like me are not having to reach out to 50,000 different people for information. But what this map really shows us is the green is oceanic surveys and the blue is freshwater. There's far more oceanic surveys, which makes sense. There's a lot of plastic in the ocean. But sometimes things that are happening in marine waters don't translate directly into what's happening with freshwaters. Plus, what we were finding as an organization is, again, not every kid has been to the ocean. Not every kid is exposed to global things, or they have a hard time understanding why something that's happening thousands of miles away pertains to me. So we went, well, let's bring it home. Let's give them something that's in their own backyard that might be easier for them to grasp. So we started to do a survey in the Ospey Lake system. So here's a different picture of that map I showed you a couple of slides back. We did it in 3 different parts, and for the sake of brevity, I'm only going to talk about the water type. But we went to different areas in the Ossipee Lake and her bays, and we collected deep water samples, or about 8 meters down, which is basically as long as our instrumentation was for that. And then we collected surface information too via a manta, and I've got a bigger picture of that in a second, so don't wonder like what on earth is that thing. I'm going to talk a little more about it. We also did plankton and sediment surveys because we wanted to see how much plastic could we have on our beach. That tells us a little bit of historically how much plastic might have been in the water. And then the plankton is a base model organism for a lot of food webs. A lot of different things eat plankton. So if it's infiltrating in plankton, it's probably infiltrating into other organisms. So a manta trawl, it's like a giant windsock, but in the water. So ours is about 10 feet long, and it's filtering out water in real time and collecting anything that is 100 micrometers or bigger in size. So we do pick up a lot of natural things. There's a lot of sediment and pine needles and pollen that we pick up, but we do pick up plastics as well. We go atrociously slow in the water. We tend to piss off lots of boaters because we go at a snail's pace crawling through the water, through the channels with this giant thing behind us, so they can't really cut us off because they'll hit our net. And it's very heavy, which is typically surprising for our AmeriCorps members. I've not dumped anyone in the water yet, but they've come close. So basically, we troll this behind the boat, and once Manti, our manta net, starts to flip over when he goes into his death spiral, we then pull the net back on shore and we collect our sample. Once we have our sample, we decided to utilize something called Nile Red to look at those microplastics. There's a lot of ways that you can look at microplastics. And a lot of organizations just do white light microscopy, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We wanted to do something a little more advanced. So we found this Nile Red system that has been used in the microplastics communities for probably about the past 5 or 6 years or so. So Nile Red, it's red. It's a red dye. It was originally used to stain lipids or fat cells, and it's been co-opted by the microplastics community because we found it binds to plastics too. Not all plastics, but a lot of them are non-polar. Water is a very polar substance, and usually non-polar things don't like to play with polar things. And so the dye is non-polar. It will usually seek out other non-polar entities to bind to. Typically, it's plastics, but there's some biologicals that might get picked up here and there. Once we do the dye, we do an excitation via a blue light. I literally have a CSI crime fighting light that you see on the TV shows where they're looking for blood splatter. That's the light that I use. It was a real interesting conversation with a CSI crime supply store to buy that piece of equipment. I could probably fight crime on the weekends if I'm bored. But once we shine that bright blue light into our sample, we then filter out all of the other wavelengths through, except for orange, and then we can snap a photo or look at it through a microscope. So here on the right is our control. We've used double filtered water that we put on filter paper, gave it some Nile red, did the excitation, and then tried to see what we could see. There's a couple of little spots of background noise that we picked up, but when we used it with a spiked in sample where we gave it purposefully a lot of plastic, we found that the Nile red really did a bang up job of binding to it. So all these bright yellow bits in here are all different plastic that has picked up that Nile red dye. So we are still in the process of sorting through our 2023 data. The nice thing of when you're doing a plastics collection project is you don't have to move super quickly because the plastic's probably going to be there for a good 20 or 30 years, so you can really take your time. So we're still going through 2023, but the past couple of years, we unsurprisingly have found plastic, which we expected to find. In this plate here, you can immediately pick up 4 pinpricks of light, but as you start to look at it microscopically, you can see a lot more plastic than you think, or you're surprised about how much you see. So in 100 mils of water, which is about 3.5 ounces, so if you think of an 8-ounce cup, it's a little less than half. We were able to find between 20 and 65 pieces of plastic on any given venture out. And that's a very conservative guess on our part. We only put things down that we felt confident were plastic. Nile red can pick up on some biologicals, and sometimes you can figure that out by looking at cell wall structure or different structures of the cell that you can see in there, like vacuoles are usually a big one. So if anything, we are on the very conservative side of things we only felt confident were plastic. Our manta trawl, unsurprisingly, probably had more, or not probably, it did have more per the 100 mils because we're filtering out water in real time. So it really went through more water altogether. And here are just some of the photos that I took of different types of microplastics that we use in our educational endeavors. So here are some beads, which are pretty solidly the same type of circle that you see in both pictures. These are actually 2 different beads. They're not the same. And then here's a series of fibers that come in slightly different colors. Sometimes the plastic is red or yellow. That's most likely based on the material that plastic is created out of. And then finally, again, those microfragments are kind of anything goes sort of shape and size to them. So I ran a little over an hour and I do apologize for that. I do want to do a quick shout out to our AmeriCorps members. We have 2 full-time and 2 half-terms annually, and they're really instrumental in Green Mountain to being able to do this work. We really couldn't have done a lot of this without them, and particularly Trent, who was the first AmeriCorps member we had working on microplastics. So he did a lot of things that we maybe ultimately couldn't use the data for, but we learned a lot from the things that he piloted in order to come up with the system that we have today. And Grace is one of our AmeriCorps members sitting in the back there, serving this term. And so I really want to thank you for your time and coming out. I know Thursday night at 7 is not the best time for everybody to come out, but I'm really glad you guys were here. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. And thank you for having me.